We'll see as people trickle into this meeting here. I'll just give the official introductions here and we'll start the conversation. My name is Nick Aldrink and I'm the Programming and Media Coordinator for the Michigan and State Theater. And I also have my moderator, my co-moderator. Sarah, do you want to introduce yourself?
Hello, my name is Sarah Escalante and I'm also on the programming team at the Michigan Theater Foundation and the festival director for our Cinetopia Film Festival.
And we are joined by two guests. We have the director of Picture a Scientist, Sharon Shattuck, and Jane Willenbring. Welcome you both. Welcome you two.
Thank you so much for having us.
Thanks.
So as we do this conversation to I guess to the person and the people in our audience, if you have a question, I find it best to you can direct message me, the Michigan Theater, and I will I will note your questions. We tend to not like distractions in the chat. As we go about, you can use it to comment and everything, but just to keep the conversation on the video, you can direct message me your questions and I will forward them to our guests. Sarah will be our primary moderator and I will be the co-moderator, so I will let her take it away.
Okay. Well, thank you, Kendall, for joining us, and you, Sharon and Jane. We hope we have some more folks trickle in. We are also recording this conversation and to make it available on our Science on Screen portion of our website. So folks will continue to be able to enjoy our conversation after tonight. So first, I wanted to thank you, Sharon, and thank you, Jane, for sharing this film and these stories with us and the wider audience. You did a really fantastic job, I think, of weaving together these three women, and then there was actually a lot of women, but the primary three women, their stories in a way that made them almost data points within the statistical data, which I think is really important with making it understandable to a wider audience, but also within the science and more data-driven community. I know I spent the first portion of my career path through my 20s and early 30s climbing the academic ladder, not in science, but in law and political science. And it was very clear for me from the very beginning, the gender imbalance. I studied philosophy as an undergrad, never had a woman professor, and then went to law school where it was a little bit more balanced, but still more heavily on male faculty, and then went into a PhD program in political science where once again, I just didn't have a lot of women in my cohort or just on faculty. And, you know, I don't think I think maybe once during law school, I actually had a woman who was kind of my mentor and that kind of voice that I was learning how to model myself after. And so I kind of knew the problem was there, but I think personally, I never really focused on it or gave voice to it, and definitely bit my tongue on rumors or experiences that I had that would fall into the different levels of inappropriate behavior that you talked about during this film. So I guess my first question really is, Sharon, what motivated you and Ian to kind of give voice to these voices that needed to be heard and start and do this film?
Yeah, well, so we started out with this film, we were actually told about Nancy Hopkins' story, one of the women at MIT. She's one of the main characters in the film, and we were told about her story with MIT and how she worked with MIT and kind of got all these women together to collect data and show that they had been discriminated against by the university. And I thought, her story came to us first, and we were, thinking about like, oh, maybe we should just make a film about that just focuses on the MIT story. But then we also were thinking, as filmmakers who work in science filmmaking, we're very aware that it's hard to find women and it's hard to find people of color to feature in our projects sometimes. And there is it's easy it's easy to find a white man. And so it's something that you just notice, you know, if you're in the field. And I'm also I was a forest ecologist, like I studied forest ecology and worked before I came into filmmaking. And I don't know, it's just something that you just kind of notice coming up in the field. And so we realized that this is still an issue, and we didn't know how much of an issue. And so we started researching and trying to find stories of people who were like willing to talk to, you know, about their stories. And that's actually how we found Jane.
Did you already have the kind of iceberg metaphor that you played along with through the storyline, or did you kind of come to that in your research process?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, we did not have that metaphor, and it's so well verbalized. Like that is actually part of the NAS study that came out in 2018 that Kate Clancy and Paula Johnson, who are both in the film, they use in the report to such great effect. It's like this metaphor of like the top 10% of the you know, most visible sites, and then the 90% of like the under the iceberg, under the water. Yeah, that was from them, and I'm really grateful that we were able to use that in the report. And that's kind of like, that was actually the first. I have a background in like illustration and animation also, and that was something that I like, and you know, kind of drew this illustration very early on, and we knew we were going to really try to use that as a central metaphor that we'd go back to over and over again.
Yeah, I think it was really strong, and I think also made it easier, or I hope easier for the viewer to kind of connect this problem to just other areas of work as well. I think there's like a lot of those under the water type issues that it's so easy to just kind of like bite your tongue and just consider that it's probably just happened, or maybe it's just happening to you, and not that it's a much more systemic problem. Jane, I just wanted to thank you for sharing your story. It is very hard, especially as a woman, to learn how to use your voice. And I think you did an amazing job of just showing your strength and ability to endure really horrible events. I guess I'm just curious, especially with you talking about getting your daughter to do her homework, like how have you maintained your love of science and your productivity and your motivation, which I can see in your face, and then watching the film and reading some of the articles that come out, like you really held on and didn't fall out of the pipeline, as is a big problem. And I just love to hear how you kind of overcame that and how you're doing.
Yeah, thanks for the nice words. That's very much appreciated. I don't really know. Yeah, sometimes I think I would have been better off had I quit. That's terrible to say, but you know, I feel like I'm a little bit less so now that I know about some of the research about how many women experience such things. But I used to think that I was like sort of this like, you know, like this sort of outlier in what people experience, and especially an outlier in people who experience such things and then also stick with science. And for a long time, I think that we did not hear from people like me who experienced terrible things, because they would often leave science, right? And so we'd have this sort of like this bias of only hearing from people who had like mediocre experiences or never experienced anything terrible. And of the people who maybe did stay in, they would just not talk about it. And that was their survival strategy. And so it's been interesting over the last few years with the Me Too movement to hear about just how many women are and were in the same position that I was, and that actually, you know, didn't stay in science. And we've lost those voices and those talents and those brains, and that we are never going to get them back. And so I feel very privileged to be, you know, someone who gets to talk to you all and to be in the film, to sort of speak to those women and to everybody about those women, about what science can be like for women, and especially women of color. Not that I am one, but I'm particularly sensitive to the fact that, like, I probably wouldn't even be in the field anymore if I was a woman of color.
So Jane, I have a question. Since you filed the Title IX, and since that was up, and since that was publicized, and now since the film has come out, have you had people ask you questions about, like, I have the situation, and I want to file a Title IX? Do they ask for your advice, and what advice do you give them?
Yeah. Yeah, that was a lot of my November of 2016. So I got, I want to say dozens, but I think it was maybe like over 100 women who like reached out with their own experiences. And, you know, that was unexpected from that result was unexpected. I didn't think I would hear from that many people. And it was hard because, you know, I'm not trained to handle such things. And it was kind of an emotional toll too, to hear about things that happened to other people that, you know, like I'd kind of made peace over the decades with what happened to me, but there was all this other stuff that people were telling me about, and it was quite hard to handle, like some of the stories from other women. Mm-hmm. And so I would be honest with them about my experience and how it was for me filing a Title IX complaint. But honestly, it's so different from university to university and institution to institution. Like, what's going to happen if you file a Title IX report or complaint, that there's not really very much that I could offer by way of advice, because it's so dependent on what the institution or the department or whatever, what they might do. And so, you know, I was quite honest about, like, here's a case where I had letters from many women who said the same thing that I was saying. Here's a case where I had a man in the field who said the same thing that happened. It wasn't in a closet. It wasn't just a he said, she said. And so these women are telling me, like, oh, I was at the lab late one night with my professor. No one else was around. It'll just be like my word against his. And I honestly didn't know what to tell them, because I know how hard it was for me in the best case in some ways, where it was completely egregious. There was no one who was saying that he wasn't a psycho. There was, you know, testimonials to say that, yes, this stuff happened. And so I don't know what to tell women who are not sure if they want to report, because it took like a lot of my time. I was very anxious during the whole process, which took forever. I already had tenure, and so a lot of these people who talked to me were, you know, students who were very vulnerable in their future careers. And so honestly, I never know what to tell people. I just tell them what it was like for me and let them make their own decision about how to proceed.
I'm also curious, especially since the film came out. I mean, so much of the film I wanted to. Of course, I understood what message you're trying to promote, but there are parts in the film where you're talking about your research, and then, like, I kind of just wanted a documentary on that as well.
Same. Her research is so cool. There's so much of it. Yeah.
Has the film affected awareness to your research?
I don't know. I don't know. I would hope to think that it would, but I'm not really sure. You know, sadly, and this is sort of like a bummer to tell you about, but you know, I got after 2016 when all of this, you know, fallout was happening, I got a grant and I told someone about it and they said, "Wow, the National Science Foundation," they said NSF, but the National Science Foundation must feel bad for you." So that was like the comment from peers that
That's
like I got this
insane.
grant because of all of this publicity and stuff like that. And so I try to think that people, and especially like women students and women of color, will feel like maybe more comfortable coming to me to do graduate work because of the film. That would be great. But so far, I don't know if anyone's really paid more attention to my research because of this. I don't know. I think I was doing okay before that, though, so it's probably okay.
I have a question for Sharon as well. I saw, I might have the source wrong. I believe I read an article in Salon. It included like a little hint or a sentence that there was a story in the film that wasn't included in the edit of a student who had a destructive relationship with their mentor and either had to choose to find a new mentor or leave her field entirely. And that was, I'm wondering, how did you, since it sounds like you had a wealth, unfortunately, a wealth of material.
Yeah.
How did you decide on these three stories? As you were filming them, did you know you're going to focus primarily on these three stories, or did that come about in the edit?
Yeah, that came, so it's interesting because as you were describing it, I think I was sort of in that Salon article, I was almost speaking hypothetically, although we've definitely had I've talked to a couple different women who've had that experience, but actually the anonymous woman in the film had that experience too. Because she was having an issue where she was David Marchand's student, and then she was actually trying to switch to another, I believe, to another advisor, and I don't know. She ended up not doing that and leaving, you know, with just a master's. But yeah, so your question, how did we decide to focus on Jane and Rachel and Nancy? Yeah, we talked to a lot of different people, and honestly, I think one thing I noticed that I was really surprised by is that it's still really hard to talk about this stuff, and it's hard to, understandably, I think it's hard to talk on the record about it, and so a lot of women don't want to talk about it still, you know, like it's like a really personal experience, and I think people don't want to be seen as victims, they want to be seen as scientists, and that's completely understandable. And we don't, obviously in this film, we don't think of anybody as a victim, you know, but so it was like, I talked to a lot of people off the record, and a lot of people had stories, and a lot of people were really angry and wanted to get the stories out and were really happy that the film was being made, but they didn't want to be, you know, put in the film. And so that was something we had to be really, you know, careful and respectful about. And but we ended up, yeah, I don't know, like we knew Nancy was going to be in the film because Nancy's story was like the first one that we were, you know, made aware of, and we loved it. And I don't know, I read that article, Jane, I read that article in Science, and I was like, oh, I would love it. Like, I just really wanted to talk to you, and I wasn't sure if you'd want to talk or anything. And so I sent an email, and I was like, oh, she hasn't replied. And it's kind of like when you're like trying to, like, I don't know, it's like you're trying to date somebody or something. It's like really personal, and you're like, oh, I hope that they write back. And then she didn't write back, and it was probably because she was really busy, because Jane's actually a rock star and she's got like a million projects going on. And
I'm also just really bad with email. I'm so sorry.
I was just like, well, it's okay. Like, you know, we'll keep working on this. But then I'm so glad I wrote her like one last time, and she she was willing to talk to us, and she was like, no, and it was totally like, no, I totally talk to you, like no problem. And so I was just like, oh my goodness, I'm so excited. And with Rachel, like she's such a awesome, like she's a really big presence online, and she's doing a lot of outreach and like work to get young people interested in chemistry. And she's got this cool like presence that's sort of like this geek thing. She's really into, you know, TV shows and Game of Thrones and stuff like that. And I don't know, she's kind of got this other like, I don't know. And also as a woman of color, as a Black woman chemist, we really felt like that was an important perspective to include in the film, because that is like something that I don't know. And I think we needed to hear from somebody who's lived that experience. And we knew we wanted to kind of get a lot of stories like around this iceberg, you know, that these aren't like, we want to really highlight the underside of the iceberg as much as we highlight the top, you know, 10%. So, I don't know.
I thought it was really interesting to, it's interesting to hear your process of how you came to your main subjects, but I think it was really well done in the sense of you had Nancy, who was amazing, and I loved how she really emphasized too how much kind of weight and pressure is put on a person to kind of be like the models around them. And for her, it was a white man. And then it's kind of hard to then let yourself show almost, you know, your emotions or your other parts that don't fit into that image. But then I thought it was really cool too, having Jane and Rochelle, in the sense that one, they're much younger, so it's showing that the problem is still so persistent, but then also they're all spread out around these different areas of science. So I think often, because at least I found academia, the higher you got, much more limiting just on like who your colleagues are, but also who your audience is. And so it was like really siloing yourself in from who you're talking to. And then I think it's so easy, like, and you talk about this in the documentary, to just assume it's only happening to you. So
yeah.
Oh,
One thing I was just going to mention, as you're saying, going up, I mean, one thing that we noticed when we talked with all the MIT women, like all, you know, 16, all the women who were able to interview with us for the MIT section of the story, they said that as they moved up and became more senior and had, you know, got tenure and started competing for the same like high level grants and resources, that's when they really started to come up against issues. And I thought that was really notable. So yeah, I don't know, just wanted to mention.
I guess oh, sorry.
That's like something that people don't really, I guess, grasp, is that like even after you're like cute and desirable, you still experience harassment and discrimination, because now suddenly you're the equals of these men. And so then you become not someone to like sort of fake prop up, but you actually become someone to compete with. And that's actually more insidious in some ways than like the first stage of harassment and discrimination. So there are various filters that you have to pass through to get to like the upper stages of in academia as a woman, and no doubt as a woman of color. And that's something like people, I feel like people don't really appreciate, that even after you've kind of like lost your sex appeal or desirability, that you can still be treated like as a woman, even though like, you know, some of the aspects of sexual harassment that we focus on have kind of faded away, but it's almost worse at that stage.
Wow.
I've heard that from so many people, that like they expected it to get better and better as their like competence showed through over the years, and it's been the opposite for them. And that's been like really hard to manage for them.
Well, I think, oh, sorry, go on, Karen.
Oh, it's not, yeah, it's not much. It's just to add to that, I did have a woman when we were making the film, and I was, we went to MIT for an event, and I was kind of telling this group of people about the film, and this woman came up to me afterwards, an older woman, and she was like, make sure you tell them that the resources, like the men control the resources, and this is what, you know, they're taking them for themselves, and like that's what's, you know, happening. And I still don't know if we really were able to communicate that in this film, but we, you know, we are obviously trying to continue that conversation.
Well, I think what Jane said made me think a question I had, and I think this is a really good time to bring that up, was like, what does it actually mean to be a good ally within your peers and colleagues in academia? And to your point, it's like you can climb up that ivory tower and make it up to, you know, your tenure, and you feel like you have some security because you've proven that you are, you know, you can be there. You are smart, you have the research, you have the ability, but the problem's still there, which makes it so much more of that it's this behavioral problem. So it's like not just addressing that this is an issue, which it is, and we know, and this was a great tool. This film is a great tool of also incorporating all of these data points in it, which makes it so much harder not to talk about. But then it's like, okay, so then the next step is then how do we make everybody become good allies, be it our male colleagues, be it our you know, also white female colleagues helping people of color who are white, who are trying to make it up too. It's just, yeah, I guess, do you I know you talked about this next step of needing to have allies, and do you have suggestions for the next steps? I know what you were talking about earlier, and this would be a time to bring up your educational screening program and keeping this film moving into the areas it needs to be. And yeah. Maybe that's a good way.
I mean, I'd say, yeah, so, well, yeah, you can definitely request, if you want to watch the film or bring it to your university or your company or anything, you can go to pictureascientist.com, and there's a request a screening like box you can fill out. But yeah, about being an ally, Jane, you had some really good, I forget, was this for our call last week when we did our discussion? You had some really good like advice about that.
Roll the tape. No, I don't know. I don't remember what I said.
I think one thing we can all do, you said this, so I don't want to like take it out of your mouth, but you did
please do. I don't remember.
You said something about like what we can do is like we can all call out this kind of discrimination when we see it happening. Like if you're in a meeting and, you know, a Black woman says something and then a guy says it right after her and they're like, oh, that's a great idea. You can be like, wait a minute, she just said this. And I think, yeah, like that's the first thing that we can all do. And that's not too hard to do. I think like there were different things that we couldn't include in the movie because of time, but I'm actually working on a series of short films now with some of the material from the film that didn't make it into the film. And one of the ones I want to do is one about how to kind of retrain your mind to overcome implicit biases as much as possible. And one of the things that Marylyn Bennoir does, one of the women who we feature in the film, she has a poster in her office of a woman of color who's a construction worker, and she just like has it in her office. And so every day she sees this poster, and it's just like these little gentle reminders of like, oh yeah, like, you know, construction worker doesn't have to be a guy, you know. But yeah, and there are like a lot of other little interventions you can do, and you can go to their site, which is the Implicit Association. Do you know the website, Jane? I'm not sure what the...
I took that test once. Yeah. It was really illuminating. I am apparently biased against women, as most people are.
Yeah. Me too. Yeah, unfortunately. Yeah, but I mean, I'm glad in the film, like, I really am so grateful that Adam Lewis talked to us, and I hope I don't know. I think people when they watch the movie have different feelings about Adam, but I think it's just so cool to see a person who's like learning and, you know, like willing to talk about things and willing to have a conversation with you, Jane, and, you know, and let us like see that process. And he really is trying to be an ally, you know? Oh, I think you're muted, Marilee.
Oh, Marilee? Hello?
No, there you are.
Hi. I just wanted to say something. I'm Marylyn Bennoir. I'm a full professor at the University of Michigan Dearborn campus, where I've been for over 31 years. Okay. I'm also for many years, chaired the Sarah Goddard Power Mentoring Award Committee, which a lot of younger women on campus are not aware of. I do more teaching and research. We do research, but I've really spent a long time working on women in STEM. And I appreciate what you're doing, because for the last year I have spent beginning oral histories and doing surveys, and the preliminary data suggests that for successful women who have persisted, that's what I'm looking at, women who have persisted, who have stuck with it, over 80% indicated that stories about women were either significant or very, very significant, which so that's really important data. And I think that suggests that these stories are absolutely critical as roadmaps for getting out of a sticky situation, or knowing what to say, or knowing who to turn to. So I think that this is tremendous work. So thank you. And I'm on the Dearborn campus. I'm always happy to listen to anybody talk about what goes on at U of M, because it won't get back to anybody there. So.
Well, thank you for joining. Yeah, that's.
I'm a biochemist. Yeah. So
there's a woman that we weren't able to feature because, unfortunately, because of time in the film. But her name is Eva Piertree, and she does. She worked with Corinne Mosfer-Kusen for a while, and now she's doing research on the influence of like video, film, and TV on implicit biases. And she's found in her research that if you like show somebody a film that features women doing chemistry, or, you know, some sort of any kind of science or math or anything, that they test better on the IAT like even a month later, because so there seems to be some sort of like just seeing that positive reinforcement of
exactly. It's really important.
Representation matters.
Yeah.
I have a question that kind of goes to the both of you. In the film, you really pointed out how the system, how just the ladder is flawed, and that you can only really advance based on the relationship you have with a mentor. So I'm wondering if you've seen any other systems in place, any alternatives that would allow, that would, I guess, abolish is a strong word, but move away from that type of advancement strategy?
So at my institution, currently, Scripps Institution of Oceanography at UC San Diego, I think they have a really great policy where if you're admitted for 5 years, and that's independent of your mentor. And so that's really important, because then if your mentor treats you badly for some reason, you're not tied to their grant funding or something like that. You can switch mentors, whatever, get yourself in a better situation. That's really helpful for allowing people to move out of problematic situations. And then we also encourage people to have co-mentors. That's something that's been happening for postdoctoral researchers for a long time, but then not so much for PhD students, and that's also really helpful. And then also having a committee take a larger role in your graduate studies so that it's not, your success is not just dependent on one single person. So like broadening the pool of people who make sure that you're on trajectory for success, I feel like is incredibly important. And then also removing the financial barriers to having people, you know, be able to jump ship if they need to. I think those are really important.
Yeah.
But it's really hard because one of the things that's come up a lot recently is like the fact that students need letters to progress to the next stage. And so that's just something that is so useful in some ways, but also so difficult to deal with if people abuse that privilege of, you know, saying like, I'm not going to write you a letter unless you do this, or I'm not going to write you a letter unless you do that. So that's a really tricky thing to figure out how to eliminate, because, you know, as we move away from metrics that might be biased, like the GRE and things like that, letters are one of these things that like, oh, letters are perfect because we can really get a handle on how this person, you know, might not have the best GPA or test scores, but actually does research really well. But those same letters can be incredibly biased and incredibly fraught in terms of their potential to be like leverage that someone has over you.
And it seems like there could even be like, I forget which study it was, but you know, like the sort of unconscious bias that could be baked into a letter, where it's like, if a woman is like a team player or a hard worker, and the man is brilliant, and
there's just no metric by which, you know, women and minorities like are okay. That's really the issue. And so like the whole thing is set up. And people's brains, even, that's the crazy thing. People's brains are set up to really put, you know, certain groups of people down. And it's hard to change people's brains, even if you change policies, you know. So that's a tricky thing to fix.
This makes me think back to my own little anecdote, I guess, for this. But when I graduated from undergrad, I went to the University of Chicago and studied philosophy, and the University of Chicago is very big at like hammering in on you, like, okay, now you go to PhD, now you go do this. Here are where you can apply. And I don't even know why I even had the thought, but I asked all my letter writers to give me a copy of the letter so I could see. And there was one professor who I had worked closely with, so I was expecting this like great letter, and it was a very nice letter, but it focused more on like my ability to organize. I was like organizing a woman reading group, and the whole letter focused more on like the fact that I threw good events and I like did that versus any of this like the actual written work and stuff that I had done. And I just remember feeling so frustrated because it didn't seem like how is this going to be useful for these graduate admissions looking at anything, because all it does is tell you I can like throw you a good event for your department.
And it would have been better if you'd not done that.
I ended up not using it, and that was part of like what was frustrating, because it was just like, you know, it's a name that I wanted to be able to attach to myself. But it was just like, it was one of those first times where I just felt disappointed, but still like didn't know even what to do with it. So just decided just to not use it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So
I've got it.
And frustrating.
Yeah. Oh yeah. I got a question from Kendall. She asks, what advice do you have for trainees working in a lab environment that isn't overtly discriminatory, but tends to pay more attention to the work of male trainees?
Me?
Just to the panelists.
Just
AKA Jane.
Oh my gosh, that's a tough one. Because in calling it out, you kind of like attract negative attention. That's so hard. Yeah. It's such a fine line. You know, you're supposed to self-promote, but not too much, you know. And you can't call it out because then you're someone who calls such things out. It's very difficult. I don't have good advice. I guess, like, diversify your, like, if you are in that situation, I would definitely diversify, like, who you are working with, just so you don't have to deal with it. But I realize that that's sometimes not possible. But this is something that always happens, like, and this sounds a little whiny on my part, but I often like get like people who will write a postdoctoral fellow application to work with a white man, like a senior white man. And then they'd say, well, I'd prefer to work with you because you're better in treating, you know, trainees well. But I really need this person as a letter writer. And so, you know, on one hand, I think, like, yes, that is correct. You, as, you know, a woman or a woman of color, you need to have those letters from white senior men. But at the same time, then by taking that position, especially if they know in advance that it's going to be problematic, you're kind of like setting yourself up for a really bad experience. And so it is a catch-22, and I don't really know how to deal with that, but it's something that I notice, definitely. Like, people tend to want to work with senior white men, right, instead of me, for example. or you know, my wonderful female friends. Mm-hmm. And then they're treated badly, and then they're like, oh, this is terrible, I was treated so badly. And it's like, well, that's awful, but, you know, it would be great if, like, you know, people put in a little bit of work on the front end to go work with people that you know are going to be supportive of you and are going to be, you know, like, lift you up, rather than purposely go to work with someone who has a terrible reputation, but also is in the National Academy, right?
Right. And there are, like, whisper networks, right? Like, there are, I've you know, I've heard from some people that they, you know, there are these, not everybody has this sort of reputation where you can just ask around and hear, you know, exactly what they're like to work with. But there are some people whose reputation precedes them.
Yeah. And to be clear, like, it's never the fault of the person who's going into such a lab. Like, that just should never happen. But sometimes it's helpful to, like, take a chance on someone who's, like, slightly more early career, who you know to be a great mentor, rather than someone who you know to be terrible, even though they have, like, a great reputation. But it's never the person who goes into that lab's fault, obviously. I don't know. I see things from, like, all of the sides now that I'm on the other side. Like, when I was a student, it was like, all of these people are bad. And now that I'm on the other side, I'm like, you know, you kind of question, like, you think about things in a different way. You're like, huh, yeah, it's really hard to change that. I'm going to work on that. And then when it doesn't happen very fast, it's very frustrating to everybody. But you kind of get, like, a different perspective.
Sharon, I have a question for you. I mean, you spoke about how this film kind of, Nancy was the first person that you started to focus on when you were telling this, digging into the story. Mm-hmm. But I know that, I mean, you went to U of M, you studied forest ecology, is that right?
Yeah, I was in the program in the environment as an undergrad. It was like the first year that it switched over from being just the forestry, like the kind of previous program. Yeah.
Do the origins of this documentary go back that far to your experience there?
They don't actually. I mean, it's funny. I mean, I never, I think kind of similar to Jane, like when I was an undergrad, I was just like, I'm tough. Like I can do this. I'm fine. I'm going to go out in the woods and wear my Carhartts and identify the hell out of these trees. And I never, and I had like all of my mentors were men. I was working with Bert Barnes, who's kind of he was a major figure at this school. And unfortunately he died a few years ago. And then Don Zach and some other people. And I don't know, I never had like these issues, but I was also young. And so I was an undergrad and I think I was in the stage of my career where I was just like, oh, like precocious, you know, young woman wants to be a forestry person. And I, you know, to be fair, like I think now, like there are a lot of amazing people at the University of Michigan and at other schools who are white men who are actually really working hard to be, you know, to like lift up women and people of color. And that's really great to see. And some of them are my friends and I'm really happy to, you know, see that happening. But yeah, it wasn't an issue. It wasn't like a personal, you know, thing that I wanted to like tell in this film. But it was something that a lot of my friends have told me stories, and I'm friends with a lot of people who are still in science. And so you hear things over the years, and I don't know. And I just, it's something that I think Ian and I was talking to him recently, and he was like, you know, we probably would have made this movie at some point because it is something that just keeps coming up, you know, like you're driving in a car and you're going to film something and people are talking and you're just like, huh, like maybe one day we should, you know, tell this story. So I'm glad we were able to, you know, to dive in and make this.
I'm surprised it hasn't been done before.
I am too, frankly. Yeah. It's like, we hope it's the first of many, you know, like, yeah.
To your point about undergrad, it makes me think back to how exciting, especially when you love to learn and actually start really digging into research, even as an undergrad where you're still kind of at the basic, it's so exciting. And then suddenly you find yourselves working and learning from these figures that you already have like blown up a bit.
Totally.
I think like that makes it so easy to overlook or think you're overthinking or misunderstanding certain behaviors. And I think that again goes to what we've talked about previously, is it just starts building that kind of pattern of behavior that you then just become used to in a way. And then it's so hard to kind of, once it's kind of like wired into your brain, it's kind of hard to be like, actually, no, I need to like say, this is inappropriate and trust my instincts.
Yeah. Yeah, Jane, I remember at one point we were talking about this, like how there are certain, like, even like older women who've kind of come up through this and they've seen it all. And it's not everybody, but there are certain people who are like, well, I had to deal with it, so you need to deal with it too, you know, and instead of sort of changing and trying to like, you know, it's sort of like, well, it's a rite of passage and you just deal with it. And that is something that I've heard. I don't know how common that is, but.
No, that's really common. And and sometimes like the senior women will like purposely harass and disparage their trainees because they want to like make them tough so that they can survive, right? So like if it comes from them and then they hear it from someone else, they'll sort of know what to expect. It's so flawed. And then I've also heard it from young women too. Like when someone says like, you know, that someone comes to another like maybe, you know, junior woman or an associate professor or something like that. And they'll say like, can you do something about this? Because I, you know, heard this from, you know, this person. It was really inappropriate. Can you do something about it? And then they'll say, you know, like that, wow, what a sensitive student, you know, and it's just like, you have a responsibility to do something about that. And just to then say that the student is sensitive and doesn't know what it'll take to flourish in academia, you are perpetuating that. And like, I hear this from my peers and like people slightly older than me. Like we say, like, I thought things would be better when my generation came up to be like, get tenure or become full professors or whatever. And it's just it's never good, right? Because they grow up in the system and then they perpetuate the same behavior because it's like learned behavior, like, and they don't want to rock the boat. Like they learn that nothing's going to happen anyway, even if they do. It's really insidious how people are just stuck in these ruts of how academia like has to be bad and has to be unprofessional, right, and disrespectful.
Can I say something real quick?
Yeah.
Oh, you're echoing, Jared. Now we can't hear you at all.
Oh, sorry. There we go.
We're sitting next to each other.
Just on the fact that you were just saying about like rocking the boat and whatnot, you know, I just feel like we're in a time right now with all the movement and the protesting right now going on outside that I feel like rocking the boat is the most important thing right now that you could possibly do with your message in your film, you know, in particular as well, you know.
Yeah, so hopefully this continues.
Yeah, exactly. The conversation should never stop after this.
And I think like even now, all of this is making me think back of all of these conversations I've had with my friends who are still in academia, and always like the easy excuse we always have about everything. Well, academia is backwards thinking. So like, of course it's not, it's doing these old things and not like moving forward because that's just not how it works. And it shouldn't be that way.
Yeah.
There's often a comparison of pain now that goes into like, you know, people compare suffering. And so a lot of times when people would bring things up before, others, like sometimes senior women or senior men would be like, well, don't worry about that. Like, you know, it's gotten so much better over the years. And so like, this is way better than what people had to deal with decades ago. And I think that's one of the fortunate things about my story is that it kind of like shocks people out of that, like things were worse before, because it's so egregious and horrible that like a lot of times senior women are like, yeah, that never happened to me. No one sat on me or spit on my face or
Oh yeah, we didn't even put all of the things in the movie. There's actually more that
What you put in was like, I can't.
It was enough, yeah, I'm sure.
Well, it's I guess sort of I have one final question and then we'll wrap this up. Jane, I'm wondering, I mean, again, your story was publicized, but did you have any, and you were used to the attention, but did you have reservations of joining this documentary? And what was that, if you did, what was the conversations between you and Sharon as you're entering into this?
Oh, I had no reservations. Okay. That ship had sort of sailed. Yeah. I realized that from now, like after 2016, I was going to be, actually not 2016, 2017 or whenever that happened, that I was going to be like, Jane harassed person. And so like, it was in error. But I actually thought that this documentary would mean that I would get to talk about it less. So I still think that's true in like the long term.
So, yeah, you can just be like, oh yeah, you want to talk about that? Watch this movie.
Yeah, watch the movie. Watch the movie. I don't want to talk about it anymore.
Yeah.
So that I could still use it as an example, but that I wouldn't have to like talk about myself so much because that's awkward for me. But. No, I had no reservations. And actually, I had no reservations, like, in the end about even filing the complaint because I had tenure. And I was just like, what are they going to do? But I discovered that they actually can do things to me. Like they could discriminate against my students, which did not occur to me at the time. They could write die C word on my office door, which also happened at my workplace. So like there are some things that like can happen even if I feel like pretty safe in my career and coming forward.
Well, the documentary was so powerful, and I think everyone appreciates you both for joining us and for speaking out and for saying all this. We really appreciate this conversation that we had.
Thank you. Yeah, thanks for having us. And if you do, if people who are watching now or like later, if this is posted somewhere, if you do want to request a screening of the film at your school, your university, your workplace, you can go to pictureascientist.com and there's a request a screening window there. And we'll have more news later about broadcasts and, fingers crossed that we'll be able to get the film out in a major way this year. Despite
Again,
COVID.
Yeah, I'm glad. I've been saying the one, at least for our business model, a good thing, a silver lining, I guess I'd call about isolation and this experience is that we are able to talk to people like you that we probably wouldn't have thought to do this before.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's awesome. It's cool to be able to have these conversations across the country,
Yeah.
Thanks for having us.
Absolutely, and thank you to everyone who trickled in to join the conversation. We got some applause from Kendall, and we got a thumbs up from Marylyn. Thank you so much.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye. Black Lives Matter.
Good night. Bye.